Hi, I'm Dave Kelso. Welcome to OnlineVisas.com, the immigration show. Here with CEO of OnlineVisas.com, John Veely. John, how are you today?
I'm great, Dave. How are you?
Man, I'm doing really, really well. We were talking last week about the president's new merit-based immigration system.
Right.
And I had some questions, and I'm glad I got to sit down with an immigration attorney and ask them. The First Lady, Melania Trump, is an immigrant to this country.
She is.
And I understand that she came into this country on an extraordinary ability visa. And I'm wondering if you could tell me about that. And under the new immigration system, would she be allowed into the country today?
Great question. Actually, she's a citizen. She's an American citizen now. We know that because she sponsored her parents, which she can do as a citizen of the United States, to become green card holders. And that happened not too long ago, a few months ago, really. And that is what the Trump administration calls chain migration, and they're trying to drastically cut. So first of all, maybe her parents wouldn't be able to come in, but we can back it up and find out, would Melania have gotten in or not? So kind of in Mythbuster style, does Melania Trump meet the credentials of the EB-1 visa? So,
it's a fair question. Would
is.
she today?
Well, we don't know everything about it because, like taxes, not all of that has been released to the public. But I've looked at a lot of things and noted a number of articles and some things. So what I learned is in 1996, Melania Kraus came in on a B1, B2 visa. All right, now that's a visitor visa.
Right.
That only allows you to come in to visit, see friends, but you can also interview for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that in 1996, that she obtained an H1B visa, which one of the criteria for the H1B is to be a fashion model. So if she came in, had some interviews, and they liked her and they offered this job to her, she could have obtained the H1B visa.
Mm-hmm.
There may have been some issues around the lottery, which exists today, but she may have gotten that, and that could all be legitimate.
Now, just as a brief aside, explain the lottery to me, right?
Okay, so in this case, it probably didn't come up, but the lottery means that there's only so many H-1B visas available. Okay. And even though our country is leading a lot of industries like technology and medicine, there are only 65,000 H-1B available per year.
And it's not first come, first serve. They have a lottery.
Yeah, well, everybody has to apply for the fiscal year, which is October 1st. And the earliest you can apply is April 1st, right? And so the regulations state it has to be open for 5 days. So between April 1st and April 5th, all the H-1B visas have to go in. This year, there were almost 200,000 people applying for the 65,000, plus an additional 20,000 for graduates of advanced degrees from United States universities, so masters and PhDs. And then this year, they changed it to put the masters in front. So we've seen a lot of these visas coming back already with our master's degrees. And we're at about 50% of the visas we put in going through the lottery this year. And we still have another tranche or so to go. So we don't know all of those answers. Hopefully that will go up. But so she obtained her H-1B, and one of the categories of the H-1B, very specific, is the fashion model. Okay. So that makes sense. That probably existed. One of the questions that has come up is whether or not she had worked illegally, right? And so we don't know that. USCIS may or may not know that. But if she was on a visitor visa and did any of her work in the United States prior to obtaining the H-1B, that would have been working without authorization, right? And
undocumented work.
That would be undocumented work, and then she would be deportable, right? One of the things that we've seen in the Trump administration that we've never seen before is actually an analysis of permanent residency and even citizenship to determine if that citizenship was obtained through fraud. So if it was to ever come out that there was a record of Melania being a fashion model prior to the approval of her H-1B visa, then her citizenship had to be taken away. Again, we've never seen that. I would always made the statement that in the United States, once you're a citizen, you're a citizen. You can be executed for treason, but very seldomly you would...
Will they revoke your citizenship?
Right, you would die as an American. Now, if they ever revoked it, it was usually over grounds like treason. Not that I've had any of that experience personally, but I've heard about it. But never before have you seen an undoing of citizenship based on people going back through the cases and doing that.
Right.
But the Trump administration could do that, or USCIS could do that if they discovered that Melania had been a fashion model prior to her obtaining the H1B.
But we understand the chances of that happening are slim to none, right?
Well, except that they are doing that now. I mean,
Right.
people, they have
To normal people, not the First Lady of the
probably
United
not
States.
the first lady, but it's a slippery slope.
Okay.
She's not always going to be the first lady.
Point
and if these laws and policies are going in today, don't just cease being laws and policies, right? So that would be interesting. So let's go on to the EB1. Now, the EB1 has been declared in the press over Melania the Einstein visa. I've been practicing 26 years. I've never heard it called that
Right.
because it's not just for smart folks, right?
Right.
It's for extraordinary ability, and that's for people who have risen to the top of their profession, right? And what I do when I'm talking to clients is I really say, okay, what's your niche? What do you do that's better than other people? Right, and so it can be anything. They might be a doctor, and they don't have to be the best doctor. Maybe they're the best researcher into some sort of very obscure science.
You handle a lot of sports immigration. Maybe they're the best rugby player, best baseball player.
And maybe even defensemen.
Okay.
Maybe, when there's a lot of, I'm a big baseball fan, and Billy Beane with the Oakland A's created a whole line of statistics, out there that never existed before to make the Oakland A's really good when they didn't have much money.
Right, Moneyball.
Moneyball, right? So in Moneyball, there's all these new statistics. So maybe there's some people that are really good in some of these obscure statistics. And we're seeing a lot of that in sports when guys are coming up for contract extensions,
Okay.
right? A number of our clients have been extended recently in their contracts. And, maybe there's these new statistics that are not just most points, most rebounds, and things like that. And
Sure.
if they can show that they're at the top of their particular piece, then they could get this visa. And that's what we do all the time. We get to define the box, and then we go out and see how did they get notoriety for that.
Sure.
Okay, so if we're looking at Melania
And the EB1.
and the EB1, I would say, what do you do if she was sitting here where you're sitting?
Right.
Hello, Melania.
Hello. It's nice to see
and
you.
what do you do?
I'm a fashion model.
Okay, well, let's talk about your fashion model. So, looking at some of this research, we found out her credentials. Now, again, we've never seen the case, so we're just going off of whatever we see here. But we found that a couple of things that the Washington Post reported that at the time that she filed. Now, she filed in 2000, it appears, and then she obtained this visa in 2001, and that's about a good standard.
Okay.
Right? We, anywhere, the fastest we've ever seen an EB1 is 4 months. A lot of times it's around 9 months. I tell people to settle in for about a year.
Okay.
To make that determination. Now, you can do premium processing today and get a decision made in 15 days, but, immigration's, this is their golden, child, right? This visa, they guard like a serpent would guard.
The dragon and the treasure.
The dragon and the treasure, right? So it's tough to have them make a decision that quickly. So there's a lot of strategy into maybe not forcing their hand to make it quick. Let them take their time. So what we know is that in the Washington Post report that she had runway shows in Europe. She had a Camel cigarette billboard ad in Times Square, and her biggest job was a spot in the swimsuit edition of Sports Illustrated, which featured her on a beach in a string bikini hugging a 6-foot inflatable whale.
That's an extraordinary ability.
That is. Well, maybe. So the point is let's look at these things and see if these are what we call, primary evidence.
Sure.
So primary evidence, I say, is a brick.
Mm-hmm.
Secondary evidence is an opinion letter, and they come in two forms. One is an expert, who is not somebody that works for Melania or Melania worked for, but somebody that can look at this and determine whether or not, in their opinion, because they're fashion models themselves, or maybe
Fashion
work for
journalists or somebody like
Vogue
that.
magazine, to
Sure.
say this is what's really a big deal about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so those people would interpret this evidence for immigration to tell them this is why you need to care about this. And another type of opinion letter is a referral letter, and that might be somebody she worked with to say why was she, what did she do for the particular
Sure.
job, how did that impact it, right? So let's look at these things under the criteria. If this is all the evidence we have, can we get to the EB1? I think it's pretty interesting. So the first piece of evidence is national or international awards right? And so there's a primary one. So if she ever won a Grammy or an Oscar,
Right.
that's all she needs to prove.
Well, couldn't you say that being on a camel billboard in Times Square, that's an award for a fashion model, isn't it?
It probably doesn't meet that one, but there are some other criteria I think it does meet. So the Camel Cigarette Board would be that she'd work for Camel, and Camel would be an organization of distinguished reputation. I think we all know that it's one of the biggest cigarette brands there are out there.
Don't smoke, kids. No smoking. Don't smoke.
Right, and so being on their billboard would be a significant ad for them.
Yes.
Right, Times Square.
In Times Square.
Right, is the biggest ad you can be on. That's indicative of somebody that's probably extraordinary in itself. But the criteria is, did she do something of critical importance for an organization that has a distinguished reputation? And so the Time magazine, or the Camel executives could write a reference letter explaining that we had her on a contract. She was paid X amount of dollars. If it was a lot of money, then that could meet high salary compared to others, which is one of the criteria. They could say that this ad had so many different people see it. And they might have some metrics to determine how many people see these ads. And you could compare that ad to other ads. You could compare it to other ads in Times Square. You could compare it to other ads anywhere and say that maybe the most seen ad that Camel had run was this. And if you compare her to other extraordinary ability models, that type of viewership was up there. So I think that's a really good piece of evidence, right? And it could hit a couple of those different things. She may have been working for a modeling agency that got that job, and they may say in their letter, right, here's the contract saying she worked for us, that she beat out all these other models to get that gig, right? I mean, obviously it would be a very premium one to get. Obviously it would probably pay well, and they could talk about that. They could talk about her modeling style and why it was better and significant in the metrics that you judge models, and determine that she was the type of model that did well here. So that could be the critical role. They could have been paid a lot of money by Camel compared to other things that they've gotten, and that would be significant for that modeling agency. And therefore that would probably meet that criteria. So you could hit that a couple of different ways. So I think that's pretty interesting right there.
Let me reset just a second. We're talking with CEO of OnlineVisas.com, John Veely, and discussing Trump's new immigration plan, a merit-based immigration plan, and whether or not First Lady Melania Trump would have been eligible for an Extraordinary Abilities Visa, an EB-1, today. We're going through some of the evidence now. John, back where you were.
So back on the existing EB-1, which hasn't been changed. The Trump plan has not changed that we've seen yet. We haven't really seen a lot of detail on it. So the EB-1, these are requirements that are existing as they were with Melania when she applied for it, and would be today if she came into our office and we're having this conversation. So to go back to that, the Camel cigarette billboard may have gone up for an award itself. Right? And so if Camel wins an award based on this billboard ad by a national or an international award granting group, then she could say, again, connecting with the letter and from the company on her involvement in it, she might be able to take credit for that national and international award, which is also another criteria. Okay, so besides awards, because we don't know if she won any or not, she may have won numerous ones. We know that she was a runway show model in Europe. So what I would ask her that, if to dig down and deeper, is who did you do that for? Again, was it a good modeling agency? Did they win awards? Did any of your modeling shows win awards? Did you get paid well for those awards?
Did you ever meet Mick Jagger?
Well, that always a great thing to know. Love Mick Jagger, right? Maybe Mick has some insight that he could tell us about why she was a great model. He likes to date them, as I understand.
He could write a letter.
Yeah, Bianca Jagger had a great career. She might be the better author, by the way. And so depending on how they knew each other, maybe Bianca would get involved. There's a lot to know about those runway shows. Again, how many people came? Was there a lot of money that was made? Who did she work for? Were these well-known brands?
Demonstrate the extraordinary level here.
Right. Well,
not just average modeling, but extraordinary modeling.
Right. So the best models will go to the best shows, I
Correct.
assume, right? And then we would have the experts quantify, this show is really extraordinary. Very few people get picked. Here's the selection process to be in that show. Another one of the criteria, besides awards and besides high salary, we've talked about that, and besides working for an organization of distinguished reputation, is being in an elite membership. All right, so an elite membership is best defined on what's not an elite membership. So it's not an elite membership if there's an organization of all models, and in order to be a model, you need to pay a due, right? That wouldn't do it. However, an organization may exist within the modeling industry, and I don't know if it does or not. This is what I would ask Melania, is have you been invited into a very unique group? Maybe it was a show, maybe it was a think tank, maybe it was some sort of organization in which models received membership based on their achievements. So
The Illuminati models.
The Illuminati models, right? So she may have been involved in one of those. We don't know.
Okay.
The next thing is press about her, right?
Okay.
Now that press is significant enough if it's in either a major publication or a trade journal. Right? Now, there's probably a couple that could go in here. Well, Sports Illustrated had her in their swimsuit edition. Well, that's both. That would be major media. And we would prove it's major media by looking at their press kit, and we would look at how many subscribers they have, how many viewers they have on sportsillustrated.com, if they had any going on in 2000. I mean, that's internet was going along there.
Sure.
But I would imagine they were leading, right? Sports Illustrated, we all kind of know, is the top sports journal, and the Sports Illustrated swimsuit model is always one of their highest ranking ones. We know that in common knowledge. So what we would do is we would go from our common knowledge to learn specifically about that. So Sports Illustrated itself could document some of that, provide us some information if they would, or I bet a lot of it is publicly available. You can go to their press kit, find out about those things, and you would support that. So Sports Illustrated swimsuit model would hit that category, and I assume if she was in Sports Illustrated swimsuit model, she's probably been in others, right? I don't know this, but has she been in Elle or Vogue or these other categories? And if she had, she could probably have a wide portfolio of those that would do that. And I would assume that by being on the Camel cigarette billboard and in Sports Illustrated, she had gotten to that level, right? I can't imagine those are the only two ads she had been in, right? So I think we're there. So those are the evidence that we have that we know of, and those are a number of the criteria. Now you need to hit 3, but merely hitting 3 isn't enough. You have to show you've risen to the top of the profession, and that's where the experts can come in, and they could quantify that, or they could give their opinion based on these pieces of evidence, right? That only so many models are going to be on a billboard in Times Square. Only so many models are going to be in the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition, right? And I think those, you have a knee-jerk that probably is correct, right? We are educating USCIS examiners, and if it had been a very small magazine, or she was an unknown tool calendar girl, didn't have her name, and something like that. That's not the same as Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, the Snap-on calendar doesn't.
The Snap-on calendar, well, maybe it does, but it's definitely not Sports Illustrated swimsuit model. But in any case, if you look at that, I think if Melania Trump came into my office, and she probably wouldn't, but if somebody else had these same criteria that I would take that case, and I think I would probably win it. So, so the question is, was she in status? Did she ever work illegally? Right. Once she got her EB-1 under the I-140 approval, she'd have to then adjust her status from the H1B, and that's where they're going to look at her back taxes, right? And in those back taxes, if they discover there's some payments prior to her H1B in 1996, that's when they could say, wait a second, you worked without authorization. You've been without authorization for this very long time. She could be deportable. So under the heightened scrutiny we're seeing in the Trump administration, they may have looked harder at that than they would have under her, right? And if that was the case, then she would not get her green card, and there she would not become a citizen, and she would not be able to do the chain migration for her parents. So she's definitely benefited off of immigration, and what I find is a very merit-based process. Right? This is completely merit-based. So to circle back to the beginning with our merit-based process, we have not seen any detail on the actual qualifications of merit-based. Okay. They're just saying we're going to go to merit-based. We know by just discussion points that may emulate the Australian model. But what's really interesting about this is they're going to have to unveil these regulations,
Yes.
right? Either in a policy, and if they do the policy incorrectly, it's going to be shot down in the courts. And there is a lot of litigation going on in immigration right now.
I'm sure.
And the courts have been shooting them down. Recently, a colleague of mine, Jonathan Wasden, is representing a number of Indian tech firms, or Americans that own tech firms that hire a lot of Indian programmers and developers and other people in the high-tech industry, has just argued that immigration has been arbitrary and capricious in how it's looking at its regulations, putting out memos. They're not going through the standard course of when you change a regulation, you put it out there for notice.
Right.
You let the stakeholders then determine whether or not they have some insight, and you slowly go about this process to
Comment
change law.
period.
Right. There is no comment period in these Trump changes, right?
Trump tweets.
That's kind of where we're going. So we haven't seen it yet. In any case, so that'll be interesting to see what happens. But in my opinion, if we're doing a MythBusters on whether or not Melania would get the EB-1, I think she would.
Approved. That's John Vealey. He is the CEO of OnlineVisas.com. Finding out factual and up-to-date and accurate visa and immigration information can be tricky. Drop John an email at john@vealeylaw.com or visit OnlineVisas.com today. Thanks.
Hey, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're looking at our podcast or our YouTube, and we'll see you next time.